Richard Hutchins was raised in Atlanta, Georgia, in public housing. At a young age, he worked in a cotton field with his sister after school. By the time Richard was 6 years old, he had already developed a passion for art. Even though he had little time for fun in these early years, Richard spent his lunch breaks drawing with a twig and a charcoal on a brown paper bag. When Richard became a teenager, he often found himself involved in the wrong crowd and was in and out of jail several times. Then in 1992, Richard moved to Los Angeles and began working at the artist and residence at Infinity Studio. But after 5 years, he was wrongfully accused of a crime and spent the next 2 years in prison. While he was in jail and waiting trial, Richard continued creating his artwork by making colorful paints out of Skittles, M&Ms, coffee, and Kool-Aid. And for a canvas, Richard used standard white postal envelopes. Richard recalls, "I did it to pass the time. I spent almost 24 hours a day in my cell, so art was a part of my escape." Every day, Richard produced as many as 15 portraits, mailed them to friends, families, and even total strangers whose addresses he found in the newspaper. In 2015, Richard was found not guilty and was released from jail. Once out of prison, Richard returned to work at Infinity Studio. Just as his life was getting back on track, a fire destroyed the studio. Hudson was devastated. "It destroyed my life. I lost about 800 pieces of work, from sketches to finished paintings." So Richard spent the next few months living in hotel after hotel until eventually his savings ran out. Soon, he found himself sleeping on the streets of LA, week after week, month after month, and year after year. Richard struggled just to survive. Then one spring morning, 6 years later, in a grocery store parking lot, Richard, who's now 62 years old, unexpectedly met Charlie DeBailey, an entrepreneur and a former music manager. After Richard and Charlie talked for a while, Hudson explained his circumstances to Charlie, who was impressed by Richard's relentless drive to carry on with his artwork despite all of the hardship that he faced. And it just so happened that Charlie ran a nonprofit called the Dream Machine that worked to help people in need to pursue their dreams. At that point, Richard shared his deepest wish was to one day see his artwork in a gallery. The next day, Charlie placed Richard on a path that would forever change his life. He took Hudson to an art store and bought him $2,000 worth of art supplies and set up an official website called Richard Hutchins Studio. 4 hours after the site was launched, Richard had already sold $50,000 worth of art. And since that day, Richard has sold thousands of dollars of art to numerous celebrities. Now that Richard's financially stable, he's working to get back to the homeless community in LA in hopes to helping others to break the cycle of poverty that he found himself in many, many years. So the next time you walk down the street, stop and look around to see if anyone can use your help. As Richard reminds us, you can show kindness to a stranger and in return can motivate him to pay it forward and be a source of change in the community.